Test, test, test. Testing, testing, test, test. John, can you hear me back there? Okay, I'm going to turn it up. Test, test. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, all right. Okay, by the way, if you listen to the lesson during the week and it's really soft, let me know so I can let Gary know, okay? So understand that there's still some difficulty with the volume, but it may mean, me changing positions. We'll just stay as it is right now. Okay, today we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We're going to finish, we should finish up chapter 1, and then I'll hand out the study notes for chapter 2, beginning of chapter 2. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. Can you catch the wind is a topic of our lesson this morning. Okay. All right, let's begin with a word of prayer this morning. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for bringing us here safely this morning. We look forward to a great time of study of your word and worship of you in the worship service to follow. Just bless our time together. We praise you for all things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, last week as we began our study of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, we spent some time just looking at the phrase vanity of vanities, and I put that up there because that's a phrase that will come up throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And I mentioned last week that in the Hebrew text or the Hebrew language, the phrase vanity of vanities is a superlative. So it literally has the meaning vanity to the highest degree. So whenever in Scripture, both in Old and New Testaments, you see words are repeated for emphasis. And in the Hebrew text, when it's mentioned vanity of vanities, the structure of that phrase indicates that this is the strongest way of saying emptiness or meaninglessness to the nth degree. Okay, so we have here Solomon giving his overall assessment, which will carry through most of this book. And he says here, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So he repeats it several times, but also it's like repeating the superlative several times. So there's no stronger way of getting across the point that this is vanity to the highest degree. Okay. And so we find here that life to some people may initially appear to have meaning and have substance, but in reality, life apart from God, under the sun, has no value and no power to give true satisfaction. And then we saw last week that in verse 3, what advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? And so in the New American Standard Bible, I have the word advantage. What advantage does man have? And the Hebrew word, as I shared last week, that's translated advantage is a Hebrew word bikal. And when you look at this word here, the first syllable is be in the Hebrew, and this is a bay of exchange. So you have this word that's translated bekal, advantage, but it has this idea of being left over, or what is left over, and the net gain after a business transaction. So there's some kind of business transaction, and whatever is left over, that's bekal. Okay, and the be here in the first syllable is a be of exchange, be of exchange or price. In other words, another way of saying it is this for that, this for that. So if you were to apply this, the meaning of the word to verse 3, what advantage does man have in all his work? You can translate it, what is the net gain for a man in exchange for his labor? Okay, so that's the question that is posed. Advantage has the idea of exchange, this for that, the net result, the net gain after a business transaction. So when we apply it here, we can translate verse 3, what is the net gain for a man in exchange for his labor? And the answer is going to be, as Solomon says, 0. Okay, absolutely nothing. So in other words, he's going to be emphasizing that you can put a lot of time and effort and energy into whatever you're pursuing here in this life, but if it's apart from God, really it's worth nothing. Okay, and to many people, Christians included, if they look at it from that standpoint, there's that sense of futility. And so many people today, they don't want to admit that life is meaningless, life does not have purpose, so they keep it to themselves, or they try all kinds of ways of bringing contentment and satisfaction in their life, and they can't accomplish that. So Solomon begins the book of Ecclesiastes by really giving us a summary that there is nothing left that will give us a sense of accomplishment and gratification, especially if you live life strictly on a human plane. And what Solomon does in verses 4 through 11 is he provides the proof or the evidence to support his premise. The premise is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Okay, so the person who lives under the sun, and under the sun refers to a person who's living his life or her life apart from God. And so when you have this phrase here, his premise is that everything under the sun, everything apart from God is meaningless. And what he does throughout this book is he's going to share his experiment of life. And he begins that with verse 4. He says, so he provides the evidence to support his premise. And again, he's going to give us some examples of what life is like for a person who is living under the sun. And again, under the sun refers to someone who's living life apart from God. And we all live under the sun, but specifically here is talking to a person who says, I don't need God, I'm not going to do what he says, I'm just going to go on my own and seek contentment and satisfaction in my own life. So, he says here, verse 4, the first example is the passing of generations. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Okay? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Okay? So what Solomon is saying here is that people are born, and then what happens? People die. And so this is the endless cycle. But he says here, but the earth remains forever. Okay, we know that in the future there's going to be a new heaven, new earth. But when you look at human life, and you compare that with our earth, it appears that the earth is permanent, whereas life itself is not permanent. So, we know theologically that there's going to be a new heaven, new earth, when Christ sets up the eternal state. But when you look at it right now, it seems like, well, the earth is still here, but people are born, people die. People are born, people die. And so there's that constant cycle, but then the earth is still here. Okay, so he makes that comment, not theologically, but he makes the comment in the sense of comparing life with more the sense of permanence of this earth. So we know that since the fall of Adam and Eve, the earth has been subjected to futility. You can look at Romans chapter 8, verse 20. We're not going to turn there, but you look at Romans chapter 8, verse 20, and you compare that with Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. So what happens back in Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19 is that God cursed the earth. God cursed the earth because of man's sin. So he cursed the earth, he cursed the physical universe because of man's sin. So even going back to the time of creation and the fall of man, the earth has been subjected to futility. So neither man who is not permanent, nor creation, which is permanent compared to the impermanence of man, nothing can escape the futility of existence. Okay? Nothing can escape the futility of existence. So what Solomon is doing is he's contrasting permanence with impermanence here. So you think about that. You know, people are born, people die. Okay? And we all know of individuals, friends, acquaintances, co-workers that have come and gone. Okay, come and gone. I just learned last week that a fellow that I went to graduate school with, he was majoring in political science, and he was, as a early adult, before he went to graduate school in political science, he was an aide, an assistant at a young age. He was an assistant to one of the top U.S. representatives in Iowa, and he was instrumental in helping this representative win election re-election how many times, okay? He died suddenly a few months ago at the age of 70. We were the same age. He was a political science major in graduate school. Well, we spent a lot of time together. In fact, I went home with him to Iowa at Christmas and spring break and met his family. Well, his parents are gone, as well. But, so I knew, and I thought, wow, Britt was, he went, after he graduated, he went to Florida. He was a nationally known consultant for businesses and consumers. He wrote several books, and now he's gone. So I think back to, I was thinking this morning, wow, the good friends that I had from college, they're not here anymore. The ones who I used to spend a lot of time with. So we think about that. You can go back in your life and think about those or maybe some good friends, family members. They were born, they died. Okay? That's the cycle of life. So that's what Solomon is writing here. He's recording the first example that supports his premise that life apart from God, life under the sun, is vanity to the greatest extent. The first evidence example is the passing of generations. Okay? By the way, if you have any questions or comments, we have the mic. We'll pass those around. So if you want to add anything, feel free to raise your hand. All right, second example is the cycles of nature. Look at verses 5 through the first part of verse 8. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to his place, it rises there again, blowing toward the south, then turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome, man is not able to tell it. Okay, so we have here, from Solomon's viewpoint, way back in his time, he looked at the ceaseless rhythm of nature. And the ceaseless rhythm of nature demonstrates the activity, or that activity in and of itself produces nothing of ultimate value. Okay? So we see that every morning, as I mentioned before, we get up, the sun rises, right? The sun rises. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, it doesn't rise every morning. Okay? You get up and it's dark and gloomy. You go to bed at night, the sun doesn't set, even though it does. But here, you get up in the morning, the sun is up, right? And in the afternoon, early evening, the sun will set, rise and set. And then you get up the next morning, the same thing happens, okay? We see that. The swirling wind, you know, where does the wind start? I think, Barbara, you're telling me it starts in Lanai, right? Okay, starts in Lanai. So if you want to see the origin of the wind, go to Lanai, okay? But, you know, if you look at the wind, and I shared a few weeks ago, I was taking my granddaughter, we went to kite flying, and I was watching the top of the trees, and then the trees would blow this way, then they would blow this way, and that way, and so we could never get that kite off the ground until experience kicked in, and we started with the line being, you know, lengthy. Instead of trying to go 3 feet and then let the line out, just say, okay, you go across the room to where Joe was, and when the wind picks up, I'll say, let go. I told my son, let go, and then it just flew and stayed up there, okay? But if you're at the ground level, you look at the trees, and the wind comes and goes. We don't know where it starts. We don't know where it ends. And certainly we cannot grab a hold of it, even though we try. Okay, it's a futile activity. You know, it's futility to try to guess where the wind is coming from and where it's going to end. And certainly you cannot catch the wind. So when you look at the swirling wind and the rising of the sun, and the setting of the sun, we talk about it reminds me of the changing of seasons. Okay, maybe we don't see this here in Hawaii, but if you lived on the mainland, any place, there's a change of seasons. And that's one of the things I enjoyed living there. Now the change of seasons differ in various parts of the country, but usually when I lived in Oregon, you went out to Oregon and fall comes, right? As it gets colder, I loved the oak trees on campus because they would turn yellow and orange and red, and then eventually in the fall the leaves would fall to the ground. And I felt sorry for the maintenance people. Who's going to rake up all of those leaves, the massive oak trees? And then it would rain, and then soon winter would come in, okay? And then in the Pacific Northwest, sometimes you would get snow, right? When I lived in Idaho and Indiana, we had snow, but it was, you know, even then it was different. Indiana was heavy snow, but it was a heavy, a lot of snow, but heavy snow, wet snow. Idaho, there was a lot of snow, but it was a dry snow because the humidity is low. Okay. Then in Oregon, it was wet all the time. So, but the seasons would change. Then winter time would come, and then the leaves would fall. It'd be gloomy and bare. Spring would come along, and the grass would start coming through we planted tulips. We had tulip bulbs somewhere. I think it was in Idaho or Oregon. And then you see them coming through the ground. So, okay, spring is almost here. The flowers would bloom. Temperatures would be comfortable. Then you get into the summer, okay? Summer, Indiana summers in the 90s, 90-something% humidity. You'd be sweating all the time. Idaho, it would get up to the hundreds, but very low humidity. I would go out and say, oh, it must be about 90 today. It was 103 or 105. You don't feel it as much. Same thing with wintertime. Indiana, you know, you get down to 30 degrees. You know, it's really, really cold because it's humid. Idaho, it would be, I'd go out and say, oh, it's cold today. Must be about 32. Well, it's 10 below, but you don't really feel it because of humidity. And then summer comes, and then you start the cycle again in the fall. So every year you can expect that. Here in Hawaii, maybe you don't see that, except that you have more hot and humid weather during the summertime. And as we get into fall, then the days get shorter. Okay, by 4:30, it's getting dark already. Who knows what's going to happen during the wintertime, whether we get any rain or the drought conditions. But you have this cycle. And Solomon saw this, recognized the cycle of life in nature, the changing, the sun rising, the sun setting, the swirling wind. The rivers flow. You know, if you have rain, the rivers flow into the ocean, but the ocean doesn't become full. Okay? I shared several weeks ago when it used to be heavy rains, I used to go down to the beach and look at, see if the water level rose the ocean. It didn't. The color of the water changed. Okay, it became more brown, but the ocean level doesn't rise just because it rains and the water in the streams and rivers go into the ocean. So what he says here in verse 7 is basically all the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. So this is another way of talking about evaporation. The water, the rain comes, it's evaporated, and then it just repeats that cycle over and over again. So it's no wonder after just looking at the examples in nature that Solomon says in verse 8, all things are wearisome, man is not able to tell it. Okay, man cannot really explain or put into words how much futility there is. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. Okay, so the second part of verse 8, when they say, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing, he talks about the third example, and that is the curiosity of man, the curiosity of man. And an example of vanity here would be man's quest for knowledge, man's quest for knowledge. Okay? Man sees a lot of things, he observes, but he's not satisfied. He listens, he hears perhaps lectures or people giving commentaries about life and about what happens in life, and yet the ear is not filled with hearing. There is no satisfaction here. So when man's curiosity is aroused, then he seeks answers to his questions. Okay? But these answers to the questions only raises more questions. I don't know if you've ever been that way. You ask a question about this and that. Why does this happen? Why does this work? How does this work? And then you seek, and then it raises more questions. Okay, even in theology, that happens. Okay, it raises more questions because the Word of God is different. We can never exhaust God's Word. Okay, and when I was in school, we were in the 4 years I was there, we were raising questions to our professors, and we had discussions among ourselves. And when we became seniors, we found out that we still had many questions that we did not answer. Okay? And when my New Testament professor would say, if we've raised more questions than answered, then we've done our job as professors. Okay? And so even today, as you study God's Word, those questions come up. So I have these little studies that I'm doing, and maybe I'll share that down the road at some time, but there's all these questions that come, so I'm doing personal study. And one of the studies that I'm doing right now, because it's been bothering me ever since I was a youngster, is how do you know when infants die, they go to heaven? Okay? And someday I'm going to share that because I'm finding out, I was told, if the child has not reached the age of moral and rational accountability, if they die before then they go to heaven. And my pastors told me that. In seminary, in our theology class, we dealt with that question and talk about the age of accountability, which, by the way, the Bible doesn't mention a specific age of accountability. Okay? But there's other ways of looking at it. So it's been something that's really been bothering me over all these years, that I haven't been satisfied with all the statements I got. So I'm doing a really lengthy study, and so that I can answer a question if that is raised. I can answer it more from the biblical perspective rather than just saying, okay, the standard answer, you haven't reached the age of moral and rational accountability, then you go to heaven. Okay? So when you study God's Word, it raises a lot more questions, and hopefully it will encourage you to continue studying and looking and exploring. Okay? Man looks at a person living under the sun, apart from God, has questions that are raised about life, and they do more studying. They hear, they see, but they're not satisfied, so it raises more questions. Their curiosity is aroused, but they will never be satisfied. Okay? How many of you have books from way back that you look at it now and they're really obsolete? Okay. All the books that I had when I was an undergraduate in majoring in psychology, when I went in graduate school, I threw away. Okay. The graduate school books were taught how to do psychological testing. Well, I find out when I look at those books, they don't use those tests anymore. Okay. Or if the tests have undergone revisions, we used to use for intelligence, Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children and the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. And now there's WISC-2 revised. Before it was just a WISC, Wechsler Intelligence Scale with children. And for toddlers, we use the Stanford-Binet intelligence test. They've had revisions of that. So I look at those books and say, these books are obsolete. You can't use them because they're not using these tests anymore, or they've gone through revisions. So I said, there's no sense keeping this. And so I throw those books away. Okay. The only book I don't throw away is the Bible, okay? Because the Bible doesn't change, right? But if you have books, if you had an opportunity to go to college and you look at some of your old textbooks, you look at those, it doesn't make sense or it doesn't apply anymore. And so they're obsolete. And that's what happens. So Solomon had access to perhaps much knowledge, and he sought knowledge, and his conclusion was that everything is worrisome. Okay, to pursue knowledge is worrisome. Everything is vanity. The fourth example that he uses here to support his premise that vanity is the vanity of vanities, or there's no advantage to that man has for his labors, is the absence of something new, verses 9 through 11. Solomon writes here, by the way, any questions, any thoughts? Any experiences you have? Okay, let's go on. That which has been is that which will be. Okay, that which has been is that which will be. And that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see this, it is new? Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. Okay, so what is Solomon saying here? Basically, he's saying there is nothing new under the sun. In other words, everything that man has accomplished throughout history really has no significant, lasting impact. Okay, you think about this. You think, oh, here's a new invention. Well, if you go back, there's the forms of what was invented in a different format, and I'll share that with you. A few weeks ago, I shared with you the Greek proverb about this fly that landed on the ox. Okay? The fly landed on the ox. After a while, the fly was going to leave. So the fly turned to the ox and said, "Ox, I'm going to leave. What do you think about that?" And the ox said, "I didn't notice you when you arrived. I'm not going to miss you when you leave." Okay? And that's perhaps a picture of what we have here. Man thinks that they can make an impact, whether it's writing books or a new invention or whatever. And man thinks that they can make an impact, but when it comes down to it, it's nothing. It's all been done before. Think about the exploration in this world. Whoever discovered America, okay, if you believe in Columbus or whoever discovered America, found this new world, okay. The United States went to the moon. When was it? In the 1960s or whatever. They went to the moon. Say, oh, new discovery. We've gone to the moon. It's the same. Discovering America, discovering what's on the moon is the same, because it both involved traveling a long distance, okay, and also involved taking risks. Okay, there were risks involved to life and safety in both situations. So there's nothing new. People are going to think, wow, going to the moon, that's a new discovery. Yeah, no, it's no different than whoever discovered America, because it involved the same risks, and it involved the same, going in long distances, but in different ways. How about the atomic bomb? Okay, atomic bomb, the mass destruction. Okay, people say, wow, the atomic bomb, this is going to be, it can end wars really quickly. And yet, when they discovered dynamite, way before that, they felt the same way. This is a major, we can use dynamite for all kinds of purposes, okay? But when you look at both, what are these both, what category they find? They're explosives. So they discovered the explosive dynamite, the explosive, the atom bomb. So there's nothing new, okay? Just different forms, but there's nothing new. And that's what basically Solomon is talking about here, okay? People think that they discover a new idea or something new, but it's already been done in a different format. And when you look at it that way, what impact is there? What impact is there? Who can remember who discovered dynamite? They're forgotten. They're forgotten that Solomon speaks about here. There will be for them no remembrance among those who still come later still, or the atom bomb. So, all these things produce only weariness and lack of satisfaction. And so people fail to acknowledge over and over again the absence of newness, because they do not remember the former events and accomplishments. Okay? So if you are beginning to get really depressed about it, that's not the point of what Solomon is saying here, but it's the reality of what he's teaching. Okay? So that is why if people, they say, well, if I get something new, if I change my wardrobe every 5 years, I'll be happy. Okay? Well, when they last changed their wardrobe, were they happy? Maybe for a little while. Okay? So they're going to change their wardrobe and get maybe the newest fashion, but the end result is going to be the same. They're not going to be satisfied. They're not going to be content. Okay? How many of you can remember when you got your first car? Okay? Your first car. You said, wow, you took care of it, right? After a while, you didn't take care of it. You don't have it anymore. In fact, maybe you might not even remember what your first car is. So you get a new car now and say, wow, this is really great. But the same thing that happened in your first car many, many years ago is going to happen again in due time. So just that cycle repeats itself, and that is why Solomon can say there is nothing new under the sun. And this is the example that he's giving to emphasize the futility of life. And so what Solomon does in verses 12 through 18 now is he's going to present his conclusions and about his own pursuits. Okay? His observations about the cycles in nature and the explorations and whatever, nothing new under the sun. So here's his conclusions and about his pursuits. So at this place in chapter 1, Solomon is going to turn his focus on the general observations about nature and man, and then come up with some specific conclusions about his own pursuits. He reforms the verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Okay, so in my mind, there's no doubt that this is referring to Solomon, because he was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and he was a writing king. So he wrote this book as well as Proverbs and the Song of Solomon. So we have here, when he was king in Jerusalem over Israel, verse 12, verse 13, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Okay, he says it in first part of verse 13, and I set my mind to seek and explore. Okay, so some people think that Solomon was very, very impulsive. Okay? So that he didn't think things through. He just went on this wild pleasure-seeking spree and didn't really plan or coordinate or decide what he was going to do. In other words, he was not conducting this experiment as a typical scientist would. Okay? But there are a couple of key words that we tend to miss in verse 13. And then these two words, seek and explore. Okay. As you read over verse 13, it's easy to just skip over that. But these are really two important words. The Hebrew word that is translated seek in verse 13 applies to more a theoretical examination or a theoretical investigation of really the source or the roots of the matter. Okay? So, in other words, Solomon applied all of his wisdom, his thinking. He analyzed what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. It wasn't a haphazard thing where he just impulsively decided, I'm going to do all these experiments to see if I can gain pleasure and satisfaction. The word there, seek, means to theoretically and carefully explore all the options and how he was going to do planning. Okay? And then the word there, explore, if you have an ESV translation, you'll have the word search. The word explore has this thought of experientially examining all sides. Okay, so not only is he going to be planning and thinking and analyzing what he's going to do in order to answer the question, is there anything in life that can bring satisfaction and contentment? What he's going to do, he's going to immerse himself experientially. He's going to immerse himself in whatever he decided to do theoretically. Okay, so this verse alone says that, answers the critics, those who say that Solomon was acting impulsively, he didn't think things through, he just did whatever, he just said, eat, drink, and be merry. Okay, no, that's not the case. He deliberately planned what he was going to do, thought it out, thought about what may be the outcomes of all that, then he immersed himself. That's the word explore in the Hebrew. Experientially examining all sides. So Solomon set out to research thoroughly every approach to life and then actively immerse himself in each one. Right? So, to many people who, if you gave a person a task, go out and explore life and just enjoy, see if you can find anything that will bring you happiness, joy, satisfaction, contentment. You would think that most people would say, wow, this is really great. Okay, I can let loose, I can cut loose and just enjoy everything that life has to offer. But what does Solomon do? In verse 13, the last part, he said, it's a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Okay, in other words, they're going to engage in this task and they're going to be bothered, continually bothered. In other words, they're not going to be able to find the answer to this question. So he says, he concludes in verse 14, says here, verse 14, I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. Okay? You strive after wind, you try to catch the wind, and you can't do that. Okay? You may try to do that. And I remember I shared with you early on, back when I was a youngster, we go to the park, and on those windy days, you see these, whatever, they look like, well, I don't know what they call it, dust devils, or, yeah. And what I would do is I'd throw a football in there, and I love to see it spin and just go all over the place. So I conducted an experiment. I would say, okay, I'm going to jump in the middle of this here and see if it will help me to get off the ground and fly. Okay. Well, nothing like that happened. I was a runt, but it didn't lift me off the ground. All it did was it got dirt all over me. So when I went home, took a bath, and I said, why is the water so brown? It's like, well, I was in this tornado of dirt, So it was a fruitless activity. I couldn't grab anything, and I didn't know where it was going, and all of a sudden it disappeared. Okay, and so Solomon says when he looked at the evidence in nature, the example in nature, and then all this conclusion, all the things that he's going to be doing, he said, all of this is a grievous task, which God has given to men, and they'll be afflicted by it. Okay? So that's the conclusion that Solomon came up with. Now, the expected outcome, whenever people seek wisdom or the answers to wisdom, they expect that if we grab a hold of wisdom, we will experience success, right? If you have more knowledge in your brain, then you would hope that you could use that knowledge in order to be successful. And then people say, if I'm successful, then I will also be happy. Once I'm successful, so I go to school, I learn as much as I can, get a good job, earn a lot of money, I'm successful. And so I should be happy. Okay? And but what Solomon is going to say, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. In fact, more likely than not, it's going to be a grievous task. Okay? It's going to be something that's going to just dash all your hopes of achieving anything or acquiring satisfaction and contentment in life. Okay, so even the search for wisdom, as we'll see when we get to chapter 2, in the search of wisdom, madness and folly turns out to be meaningless, as he tells us in verse 17. I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. We're going to be talking about what madness and folly is here. I realize that this also is striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Okay. Has anyone experienced that? You know, the more you know, the more painful. You know, maybe look at your careers. Okay, when I started in mental health, I enjoyed it, but then I wanted to advance more, so I got into administration. I thought, okay, administration, I have maybe more control over the foolish therapists, that instead of working with them, I could have more control of how they're going to do their work. Okay, and so I gained experience in administration, and then when I went to nonprofit, same thing. What did I find? More grief. Okay, you know, and those of you who have kind of climbed the ladder, you know that. You've been in one place and one job for a long time, and you start off as a line staff, and then you go up to administration. You know that there's more problems and more grief and more dissatisfaction. So the more you know, the more experience you have, and the more experience you gain, it doesn't result in success. It doesn't result in happiness, but it just brings more grief. So, you know, why do people? I've known the people who went to school, college, they majored in something, and then after a while they're doing something totally different. Okay, you wonder why. You know, my youngest son is an engineer. His good friend was an engineer. They went to school together in California, and his friend graduated with a degree in engineering management. Okay. What is he doing today? He's a professional photographer. Okay. And because when he was a senior at University Pacific, the school hired him as photographer, the school photographer, and he loved it. So now he does all these wedding shoots and these engagements shoots all over, you know, California. And then he got my youngest son hooked into photography. So my son took photography, and then when he went to Japan on an internship, he took a lot of good pictures. And now he lives in Arizona, but they do wedding shoots. So when his friend has a wedding shoot in San Francisco, my son will fly over and help him, gets paid a little bit, but he just does it because he loves it. Okay? He has his engineering job, but then he loves photography. Okay? When there was a wedding shoot on Maui about a year ago, they both flew over to Maui and they did a wedding shoot. Okay? But then his friend is no longer an engineer. He's not in the engineering field, but he loves photography. Okay? He had all this knowledge, 5 years of schooling, but he's not, you know, he found that really engineering doesn't really provide satisfaction, so he went into photography. And perhaps maybe that's happened to you in your own life. You started on a course. I had a good friend who passed away about a year ago. When we were in college, we started as a freshman. I asked him, what's your major? I said, oh, pre-optometry. I'm going to be into optometry because the college we went to had an optometry school. So after a year, he dropped out. He said, optometry is not for me, okay? So what did he do? Eventually he got married to his college sweetheart, moved to Michigan, and he became a successful, very successful plumber. That's what he loved to do. And you know, I Googled his business and high remarks. You know, inspectors said, you know, we can tell this is Steve's work here. We don't have to even guess. We know the quality of the work. But that's what he loved to do. Okay, so even though we feel that sometimes we acquire more knowledge, we'll be successful, and then we'll be happy, that doesn't always work that way. Okay, and many times it could just work in the opposite way, where it brings more grief. Okay, so Roman numeral 3. We'll finish this up. What are the practical ramifications of Solomon's observations? Okay. What Solomon was doing here in beginning chapter 1 through most of the book, he was looking at life in a horizontal perspective. Okay, so God is not in the picture at this point. So he's not looking vertically, but horizontally. Everything around him that he could explore, he could seek and explore, that will bring satisfaction. And so he comes up with 2 thoughts, I believe. First of all, if there is nothing but nothing under the sun, our only hope must be above it. Okay? And he's gonna be teaching us that later on. If there is nothing but nothing under the sun, our only hope must be above it. Okay? So, just as when babies are born, they have a need to satisfy their hunger, right? You know, if you have babies, you know, you can tell when they're hungry, they want to eat, okay? So as individuals, we have an innate need to find purpose and value in life. I think all of us deep down, we want to have meaning in our life. We want to have purpose in our life. And what Solomon has found, and he's going to share with us in the chapters to come, is that if you seek to satisfy or acquire meaning and worth in life purely on the horizontal plane, then that's not going to happen. And therefore, we must seek that satisfaction and meaning on a vertical level. Okay, so our frustration and despair should turn our eyes from earth to heaven, should turn our eyes from man to God, and from ourselves to Jesus Christ. Okay. Second, if a man who had everything, and Solomon had everything, you go back to Kings and Chronicles, he had everything in life. If a man who had everything investigated all that was visible, you know, all the experiments, all the riches that he had, if he investigated all that was visible and still found nothing of value, then the one thing he needed must have been invisible. Okay? So, like Solomon, all of us can explore life and all that is around us and not receive any satisfaction. So if we want lasting joy, then we have to go to the invisible world. And we need to be directed to the one who desires to abundantly satisfy our thirst for contentment, and that is the invisible God. I'd like you to turn to Acts chapter 14. I think I have this in your notes, but just like to emphasize these passages here. Acts 14, verses 15 through 17. And just remind ourselves who is responsible for everything in this world, okay? Acts 14, verse 15, it's saying, what we have here, this is after Paul goes to Iconium, and he and his associates, they heal this man who was lame in verse 8 of chapter 14. And so after the crowds witnessed what they did, they called him God. They began, verse 12, they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes because he was a chief speaker. So Paul comes out and says, no, hey, don't worship me. I'm not who you think I am. And then notice what he says in verse 15, saying, men, why are you doing these things? We are also men of the same nature as you, and preach the gospel to you, that you should turn from these vain things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In the generations gone by, he permitted all the nations to go their own ways, and yet he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Okay, so this is a way of Paul saying, focus your eyes not on what you're seeing, what he and Barnabas were doing as far as healing this lame man, but remember that God has blessed us with these good things. So focus your eyes on him rather than everything that's in this visible world. Go back to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. Romans 1, verses 19 and 20. Well, let's look at beginning of verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what he has made, so that they are without excuse. Okay, so Paul here is reminding folks, reminding us, it is God who is behind everything. If you seek to find happiness and strictly on the horizontal level, you're not going to find happiness, satisfaction, and contentment. So what you need to do is go to the vertical level. Okay, focus your eyes on the invisible God. So those are the two, two practical applications that I believe come or surface from Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. Okay. Any thoughts, questions? Okay. Next week we're going to go to chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. So here's the study notes. Thank you, Marcia. We're not going to start this today, but I'll just make a couple of comments. What we're going to talk about next week is hedonism. You know what hedonism is? Hedonism is seeking pleasure. Okay, we're going to find that hedonism has been around for centuries, and the general attitude, I think, not only today's generation but past generations, can be summarized in the words: "If it feels good, do it." Okay, if it feels good, do it, and Christians also have that attitude at times. So we're going to be looking at that. This is what Solomon is going to be talking about, that he was engaged in this activity of seeking pleasure. If it feels good, do it. And we're going to see what his conclusions were. So you'll notice that these lessons are a little shorter, so we should be able to accomplish, go through each lesson in a week's time. And I'll have the next study notes ready, because if we finish chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, then we might be able to start the next lesson. So some Sundays we might be doing 1.5 lessons, because chapter 2, verses 12 through 26 is going to tie in with the first 11 verses of chapter 2. Chapter 2 begins with eat, drink, and I left it blank. Okay? Because people will say, well, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, is that what it's going to say? No. Later on, Solomon is going to say, yeah, eat, drink, and be merry, but you have the proper perspective. But right now, if your attitude is eat, drink, and be merry, apart from God, no, it's not going to bring satisfaction. And then chapter 2, verses 12 through 26 is going to be emphasized. He's going to be emphasizing the hopelessness of finding genuine happiness. Okay, so instead of giving you one set of lengthy notes, decided to break it up into 2 lessons. So next week, look at this for next week, bring it back with you, and we're going to look at eat, drink, and whatever way you want to end this that statement. All righty, let's go ahead with closing with a word of prayer. Hang in there, okay? It gets better. It gets a lot better than Lamentations, all right? And we're going to see a lot better stuff